As just mentioned, persistent staging area, or PSA, is where our data is stored when it is first input into a data warehouse. As shown here, that data is saved directly from its source without changes. Okay, but we can also make changes to the data after loading if necessary. Okay, if there's some errors in loading, it can be changed. And from PSA, data then is further loaded into the operational data store, as well as data warehouse at a later stage. And we'll talk more about the PSA in the overview of SAP BW unit later on. The second component is the operational data store. And as the name implies, this is where operational data is stored. Okay, so in other words, business transactions or transaction data can be stored here. So data is granular, which means it is very detailed. So it's basically business transaction data that are copied from an OLTP system into a data warehouse for further reporting and integration into a data warehouse necessary. Okay, so as shown here, that it may feed data into a data warehouse layer at set intervals. So data can be integrated into a data warehouse from various operational data stores. And also notice that data here is volatile. Okay, so this is different from a data warehouse, which has non-volatile data that, as we talked about earlier in the definition of a data warehouse. And we'll have a separate chapter on operational data store later on. The next component, data warehouse, as you can probably imagine, is the historical foundation for BI. Okay, so that's the data warehouse that we talked about earlier, that has both granular data as well as integrated data. Okay, and data is non-volatile. It's application neutral. Okay, which means that it is integrated from different areas, and then from there we can further load data into various data marts, which are more area specific. Okay, so finally, the data marts, they focus on information needs of a particular business unit or function. So you may have a data mart for sales, another data mart for FI, another data mart for CEO, and so on. Okay, or even a data mart for HR. So different data marts for different business functions. You can have both aggregated as well as granular data, just like in a data warehouse. Often they have multidimensional data models to facilitate multidimensional analysis. Okay, so we'll also have a separate chapter talking about the implementation of data marts in SAP. Okay, so I guess basically a point to remember here is that in a modern data warehouse, you have more than just the data warehouse itself. Okay, it has various components or layers, including, of course, data warehouse, but also the PSA, the operational data store, as well as various architect data marts. Okay, the architect data marts means that they have a particular architecture. They are designed specifically to take data from a data warehouse. Okay, as opposed to data marts that are not they are not coordinated. Okay, by architect we mean that those data marts are carefully designed based on data that is integrated in a data warehouse. And finally, in this section, the model that we just talked about that includes the PSA, the data warehouse, the data marts, the operational data store is a conceptual model, right? But in the real world, different companies may implement their data warehouse in different ways. Okay, so you have different alternatives in terms of data warehousing architectures. And the one that we just talked about is more closely resemble the one that you see on the right hand side. Okay, the architecture that is possible, but there are also other architectures followed by different companies. Based on the study done by two researchers published in 2007. Okay, so I guess the point is that even though the conceptual model that we just saw is pretty, it's not. I don't like to say standard, but it's pretty reasonable. But in the real world, you're gonna see different architectures in different companies. Okay, so for instance, on the left-hand side, you have some companies that have only data marts. Okay, it is labeled as independent data mart architecture. That is, you have all kinds of data marts for different departments, for accounting department, HR. Purchasing department and so on, that are not integrated. Okay, that do not follow a particular architecture or a particular blueprint. And then to its right, you have a centralized data warehouse with dependent data marts. Okay, architecture. So then you have a data warehouse created first, then you can build out data marts accordingly based on data that is integrated in the data warehouse. Okay. Now, one reason that companies have different architectures is that a data warehouse, as we'll talk about in the future, that is a very expensive endeavor. Okay, it can take easily several years and then millions of dollars to create, because data warehouse integrates data from different departments, and it includes data over time. So you have huge amounts of data to be included in the data warehouse. So it's a very expensive endeavor. And as a result, some companies decided to, just forgo the data warehouse and go with small data marts instead. Okay, so that's why you have the independent data marts on the upper left-hand corner there. Which, the advantage, of course, is that it's less expensive, but the disadvantage is that those data marts may not be integrated. Okay, you may have redundant or inconsistent data among the different data marts. So a better alternative then is to have a data warehouse built first and make sure data is integrated, and then you can then build out data marts based on the data warehouse shown in the upper right hand corner. Alright, and then you have other alternatives shown at the bottom, such as just one data warehouse without any dependent data marts, or you can also have a virtual data warehouse. Okay, so in the real world, you're gonna have a lot of different architectures, but in theory, the conceptual data model, as the one that we just talked about in the previous slide, is probably the ideal situation that a company should follow if possible. Okay, here's another review question for you.